Welcome to My Therapist is Out. Each episode, we talk with a therapist from Open Space Therapy Collective or LGBT community members about mental health and building community. This week, your hosts are OSTC therapists Kristen Crowe and Ernesto Martinez. Kristen is a licensed therapist and dance movement therapist. They specialize in working somatically with adults and partners to help heal the mind-body connection so you can feel more grounded and vibrant in every day. Ernesto is an associate therapist who specializes in working with adults, teens, and adult children of immigrants to transform challenges into stepping stones towards self-compassion, fulfillment, and confidence.
As we dive into today's topic, please keep in mind that this is a mental health podcast. We will talk about sensitive and difficult issues that are not appropriate for all audiences. Please take care while listening. Hey, welcome back to My Therapist is Out. My name is Kristen Crowe. My pronouns are they, them. I am a board-certified dance movement therapist and licensed professional clinical counselor, and I am here with Ernesto. Hey, Ernesto.
Hey, I'm Ernesto Martinez, AMFT, a PCC. I'm just getting into it. My pronouns are they, them, he, him, él, ella. Recently, I've been using all pronouns, though.
All right. Thank you. And we are here to talk about when your brain doesn't fit into a box, how neurotypical standards fail neurodiverse people. So Ernesto, before we dive into this, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling a little wiggly right now. I'm feeling contained, held. But in relation to this topic, I'm feeling excited. I'm excited to build off the conversation our coworkers have already started around this, and our community members too. And just a little yap moment. I think it's really timely because right now we're a month away from July, and July was the 35th anniversary of the ADA, American with Disabilities Act, which protects the civil rights of many different folks in the disability community, including neurodiverse folks.
So it feels like a nice time to be settling into this topic and discussing all of its, well, not all of its, but many of its nuances.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're just jumping in to joining Ernesto and I, we recommend that you go check out our previous episodes in this topic, which include our intro to the topic by Allison, how social media is showcasing characteristics as well as like common myths and misunderstandings. There's some history in there. And then we also had two episodes actually, with our psych NP friend Mikey and their sister Jenny, who is a special ed teacher who specializes in ADHD, and they have some really cool stuff in there. So recommend go checking those out. And then there are some other ones that we have: consent and community treatment. And I did an episode a while back also, what is neurodivergence? So there's a lot of stuff. We like talking about the neurospicy here, I guess. So, Ernesto, you got anything about this coming up for you?
Yeah. Here at the top, there's going to be a lot of air quotes that I do throughout this episode. Also a lot of yapping. But I guess if I'm just trying to like do a little abridged version, as a therapist, I'm like continuously growing, I feel like, in my aspirational specializations around treating folks and supporting folks through a neurodiverse informed lens. And at the same time, I pull from my own experience as a neurodiverse individual. And so, yeah, I feel like my brain is just buzzing and I'm going to be yapping.
Probably same. My own neurodivergence is definitely going to pop up. And we're going to do our best to keep each other on track.
Yes. Yes.
I was thinking that I would be giving a broad definition of what we're talking about, and then you can jump in and get a little more detailed. That sound okay?
Yes, that's perfect.
Awesome. So when we think about neurodivergence, we're definitely talking about a difference in processing information. Typically, when we hear that, we're thinking about folks on the autism spectrum or folks with ADHD. But neurodivergence is actually a much larger umbrella, and that can include things like OCD, Tourette's, synesthesia, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dyspraxia. And there's a whole lot of other ones. So with that in mind, Ernesto, do you want to talk a little bit deeper?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. This is related. I promise. Everyone get your visualization brain moment out there, because I'm going to share a way that I make sense of the term neurodiverse and how it relates to two other terms that give it context. And I think the way that my brain really likes to see this is, y'all know Venn diagrams, right? So two circles overlapping with an intersection in the middle. We're adding a third one. So it's a three-pronged Venn diagram. At the top, we got neurotypicality. So this is a view or around like typical developmental standards. We're talking about the brain here, right? And so one way to see it is how typical brains are described, viewed, understood through a neurodevelopmental lens and also a sociocultural lens when it comes to standards and expectations of everyone, right? Air quotes, air quotes, air quotes.
On the typical and the everyone.
Neurodivergence is another overlapping circle on this three-pronged Venn diagram. And I think about neurodivergence as this piece that focuses more on the clinical, medicalized, diagnostically related information domain. And so this is the domain where we think of some of those diagnoses you were mentioning. It's very medicalized. It's a way that makes sense. And the neurotypicality realm speaks to the neurodivergence realm. And so the last overlapping circle is neurodiversity. This is the seasoning, I would say. And this is the more sociological, culturally informed, communal identity piece that may speak to an individual's positionality towards neurotypical standards. And so this is different from neurodivergence in the sense that it's very community oriented. It's very embracing of the variations of human cognition. The roots are in the term that was coined by Judy Singer in the 90s, and it's based off the concept of biodiversity. So it's just basically saying our brains experience the world differently. So it kind of lumps in neurotypicality within it in this intersectional point. And it speaks to neurodivergence too. They kind of inform each other. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's because I get the beauty of looking at your Venn diagram while we're talking about it, but I think that it does. It helps give this a little bit more depth and a little more understanding, and makes it just, I love the, like, all brains, regardless of ways that they are wired, experience the world differently, even neurotypical brain to neurotypical brain to neurodiverse, like all of the things. So I think that's really lovely and really normalizing, actually.
Yeah, I think just to maybe round it out, I like the Venn diagram piece because they all, in my brain, and the way that I understand these three different concepts, they all speak to each other. I think maybe down the line, we'll even talk about curb cut effects where like neurodiversity language trickles into neurotypical language now too. And so it kind of shapes also the way people talk about their own needs. Anyways, I think we'll get there.
I was like, I'm pretty sure that's coming. So if we're looking at the way that we as therapists, quote unquote, I'll use treat, or they'll even like the lenses that we look at all of this through, like, how do you see that, like, kind of working into that Venn diagram idea? Like, what does that look like?
See, I see us in the middle of that Venn diagram. We're kind of caught in the middle where, part of our training is to understand diagnostically related information, clinical information, which is all neurodivergent stuff. All of that makes sense from a neurotypical lens too. We need that neurotypical domain as a reference point for some of these diagnostic criteria to make sense. And then, and this is where I feel like I really rest more comfortably in the neurodiverse piece, because I look at the neurodiverse piece as the socially informed part, the stuff that maybe in our schooling we don't get taught, because neurodiversity is a cultural movement. And so I can speak for myself. I know in my program, we didn't really talk too much about neurodiversity through a social cultural lens, but it is my bias that as practitioners, we kind of need to know what's going on in the neurodiverse realm, on the cultural level, to make sense of how we're going to show up for our clients.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And, I feel like this speaks to even just the title of the episode of like how the neurotypical standards fail neurodiverse folks, right? It's if we're not understanding that all of this is a social cultural movement, then we fail to understand how these standards are impacting our clients who are neurodivergent, right? Like we don't have the support systems in place a lot of the times, or how do we help them access different things? And if you're just kind of normalizing, oh, well, just get your planner, or like stop doing whatever, or right, like it doesn't help, and it just further stigmatizes a lot of it.
That's just like, it feels so good in my brain to hear it out loud from someone else.
I think also our brains probably do we hear a lot of that on the inside voice. So
Yes.
Hearing it outside is helpful. I know that with my clients, if we're talking about this, I have a lot of my folks come in and they're saying, like, people will explain something to me and I don't get it and it makes me feel dumb, or like I have a hard time understanding nuance, or other people have a hard time understanding my nuance. And so that leads to feeling like misunderstood a lot. I can't understand like people's emotional states, and, like I need them to be more direct or more open. And so I feel like a lot of that comes in to the work from that kind of space. And I'm wondering, how do you see it show up for your folks?
I hear two questions there. I think one question is like how I see it show up for my folks, and how I also show up for them to make sense of it. And I think something that I know that I kind of like to lead with is finding other ways of collecting data when it comes to my clients' goals. And so one way that feels more accessible to some folks, as opposed to something like, let's talk through steps or practical things that you can do in a social dynamic, also giving space to something like, let's collect data through some of the sensory somatic stuff that might be signaling an emotion or a feeling, but in the moment, that's not at the forefront. It's not at a level where you, for many different reasons, are able to, and this is now pulling from my own space, verbalize it in that moment. And so this understanding that there's other ways to make sense of therapy stuff, like if we're exploring relationships, if we're exploring our own behaviors, default stuff that sometimes is really confusing for us too. There's different ways that I like to offer making sense of any of those variables that go into a goal. And so for me, I like to give options. So that's somatics, sensory stuff, also relational and systemic stuff too. So giving some perspective here and there, helping folks kind of pull apart any kind of shame, any kind of guilt that they have too, and really taking a step back, if it's useful for them, to look at the systemic pressures that they're having to navigate through when it comes to expectations they might have for their own self, or stories or narratives of what is the right way to show up in relationships, in a work role, in a partner role, all these things that I see some of my clients come in with a lot of shame and guilt.
Yeah, so much shame and guilt. And sometimes in my clients, I see a lot of like confusion or frustration. Like, I don't understand why this just isn't working for me. Like, yeah, kind of giving them that outside perspective of like, the system's not set up for you. Right. So like if we can normalize that and we can kind of ease some of that narrative, like you said, then what kind of other tools are available? I love a somatic lens for noticing, are your senses overwhelmed and that's why everything else is harder? Like how can we take some of these stressors down?
Totally. I'm reminded of one thing that in many of my clients sometimes resonates at certain points is just normalizing the different ways that we all take in information, because a lot, to speak to your, like, sometimes folks coming in with maybe some confusion around why certain relationships feel the same way or why they feel certain things in receiving some kind of feedback or any kind of, I'm trying to like find ways to describe communication patterns, but just in general, when we're talking about stuff with other people, I feel like that sometimes is a point of frustration, maybe sometimes even shame and guilt too, wherein there's just feels like, oh, I'm not understanding how to relate to folks. And so I know that one model I like to use as a way to give perspective and normalize our needs when it comes to communication or any other kind of, we can like map this onto multiple things, but this idea of we're all going to have different tolerances to ambiguity and different needs for concreteness or things to be very clear. And that's like a spectrum that I like to put out there so that folks can look through that lens when they're thinking about like, oh, for whatever reason, whenever I'm talking about this very specific thing or making plans, I need more concreteness, but I'm always met with like a ambiguous answer and it really elicits a lot, right? And so this is just kind of like a way to also hone in and be able to hold your specific needs. You need more concreteness when it comes to making plans, but maybe when it comes to creating art or making a painting, you like ambiguity, where vice versa for someone else, they're like, no, I need like stenciled out, like I can't just free flow.
Yeah, I need a color by numbers personally. So that's kind of like the general stuff. And, this podcast isn't called My Therapist is Out for Nothing. So how do we see this stuff showing up with like queer, trans, people of the global majority, disabled immigrant communities? Like what does neurodivergence, neurodiversity look like there?
This always feels like a question where like the needle kind of moves, or the way I'm understanding it also moves. And so like I find myself feeling a lot more or understanding, trying to figure out how this aligns with identity stuff, queer folks, BIPOC folks, different marginalized groups, oppressed groups, through more questions than answers.
I mean, yeah.
Like some questions that I like really help me understand how I'm seeing the intersections of not just being a neurodivergent or neurodiverse individual, but also the intersection of, for me, a queer person, a child of immigrants, a brown person, is bigger questions around even my role as a therapist, where it's like, who gets to decide what desirable outcomes are for our clients? And there's different treatments out in the world. Folks are out there looking for therapy. And I think, I don't want to speak too generally, but there exists some treatment programs that there are outcomes already kind of set up for those folks coming into seeking treatment.
Absolutely.
So in those spaces, it's also questions around, well, who gets to define what is normal in those clients' life? Who benefits from labeling brains as atypical or abnormal?
Heavy air quotes.
Yes, lots of air quotes. And also, when it comes to like the systems of incarceration here in the US in general society, who gets diagnosed and supported versus who gets criminalized.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yep. Yeah, sorry, I went quiet because I had a big body reaction to that.
Mm-hmm.
I am gonna glaze over that because I feel my body wanting to be on a soapbox, and we don't have the time for the soapbox. Unless you want to add something that's gonna be brief. Because mine's not gonna be.
I guess just really briefly, especially on this point around criminalization and who gets diagnosed and supported, there is, you go onto Google, you might be searching something like neurodivergent BIPOC individual who, was a victim of police violence, and then it probably in different words, you'd put that into a Google search or some kind of search engine, and you're going to get a lot of examples.
So many.
Yeah.
An incalculable number.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and, for total transparency, we planned on talking about that, and I didn't think that was going to quite throw me for the loop that it has.
Hey, Renee popping in just for a minute to say thank you for listening. We really hope you are enjoying the conversation today. Any chance you have to rate, review, subscribe, and share with a friend makes a huge impact, and we greatly appreciate it. If you have extra bandwidth and want to support the show even further, you can go to mytherapistisout.com and click the donate button. Any donations from $5 a month to a one-time donation makes a huge difference for us. We're a little self-published podcast, so any extra dollar helps. Again, go to mytherapistisout.com and hit donate. Now back to the show.
What about merits of self-diagnosis?
Yes.
I'm wondering about folks who don't have access to care. I'm worried about folks who, for a number of different reasons, right? It's not affordable. It's not they're not in an area where that is accessible. The providers that are there are not affirming at all.
Totally.
I guess looking at self-diagnosis, broader implications of a quote formal diagnosis, because a lot of these things don't actually have formal diagnosis. Anyway,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thoughts on all that?
Yeah. No, well, whenever I hear stuff around self-diagnosis, honestly, not with you, but with some folks, if I'm being really honest, other therapists out in the field, I do feel like I'm walking on eggshells because it's such a complex thing. I think it's kind of frowned upon in a lot of circles, especially in our social media age and all that comes up with TikTok therapy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm not frowning on it, but I'm also completely, I'm curious around my impulses on why I might want to gravitate towards self-diagnosis as something that is valid. Because I know it is complex. I'm still really wrapping my head around it and how I feel around it. But to your point, what I do know, aside from the complexity of self-diagnosis, is that, there exists a lack of access to neurodiverse affirming care. There is also an affordability piece that going forward with some assessment or a diagnosis is very expensive and inaccessible to some folks. And so it's I see a scale that's really weighing all the things. It's very complex.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking, in the current political climate that we are recording this within of, August of 2025, the mandatory registration of individuals diagnosed with autism is a scary thing. And is that worth the potential risks that could come from that versus the potential benefits that they could get?
Totally.
And I do know that for a lot of my folks, self-diagnosis feels good. They're I found a community that understands me. I found a community that I can talk to about these experiences. And, that's enough without having the formal piece of paper.
I think this is a layer too of that neurodiverse realm too. And it kind of trickles into neurotypical stuff, because this is essentially, I know that pop psychology on TikTok and social media is really big. And so it's like expanded the language of speaking around needs too. And it helps folks even, what's the word? It's like being able to have common language around our like different experiences and our different needs when it comes to socializing with each other. Like I know that I know so many, I'm thinking about some clients who like to connect with other folks through learning about their special interests, or exploring ways to still go out and do stuff with other people who have different sensory needs too. And so it's this level of like, oh, connection. I want to understand your needs too. Oh, this friend that I made, showed me this new sensory toy. Oh, I'm thinking of those like square putty things that are amazing.
Oh, is it the Nido that I shared?
Yes. Yes,
I love that thing.
I had a client bring one into session once, and I was like, I need that.
It's so good.
This is not sponsored, but sponsor us, Nido.
Yes, please. So I guess I'm also thinking, like, in the sense of community that folks can find through the self-diagnosis is beautiful and great. And I'm also thinking about, like, the reasons those are so important is because folks don't feel seen or validated or supported in the, quote, neurotypical way that the systems are set up. And I saw this on pop psychology, whatever, on probably Instagram, because I'm too old for TikTok. But talking about, like, it's like neurodiversity, neurodivergence, anything apart from the neurotypical is like living life on quote unquote hard mode, where like the systems aren't set up for you. So you're battling everything to keep up with these standards that are being, told to you through a bunch of different types of media and systems and other communities. And that's hard. So how do we look at that through a client's eyes? How do we help them?
Immediately, I'm just thinking about how a lot of those internalizations of expectations and standards and what is like a right way to show up in certain environments really chips away at folks. And I'm thinking of some clients and how it chips away in their even wanting to further understand themselves too. It's like feeling like, oh, okay, well, no, I'm wanting to, or maybe at one point in my journey have wanted to fit in, right? And so I'm masking, or I am putting aside all these things that feel a lot more authentic to my own self so that I can fit in. And it really contributes to moments of shame and guilt and pulling that apart, supporting folks and being able to really weigh and identify that they might be operating towards expectations and standards that were kind of put onto them for a lot of different reasons. I'm thinking about how we might facilitate someone in weighing the benefits and the costs of those standards and expectations. Instead of telling them, my role is not to tell them that that's wrong. It's to support them in fully understanding, okay, in which ways has this benefited me? And now at this point in life, maybe there's a moment where we're not seeing the benefits anymore. And there's just a lot of costs in wanting to fit in to these standards and expectations, helping them in identifying what those costs are.
And I think that's the compassionate and not pathological way of helping folks understand that, right? Like, it's okay, so you have these set of characteristics and they all have different varying levels of needs for attention. So how do we help you get the support that you need, advocate for the support that you need, and also track for yourself the support that you need?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so kind of building off of this idea of a compassionate and non-pathological lens, I think some maybe practical tools, frameworks, perspectives, ways to look at some of the work, what therapy can look like is, so I know on my end, it's really common to find myself in helping folks or supporting folks in acknowledging that being neurodivergent and navigating a world not designed for your brain is inherently stressful. Getting to that first step of, okay, let me maybe not internalize so much of the shame and the guilt because I am navigating a world that to a certain extent wasn't really designed with me in mind, right? And so trying to pull apart that guilt, that shame. From there, kind of exploring stuff around identity and beliefs and how identity might have relationships to certain beliefs or expectations like we've been talking about, and how sometimes operating from that space, thinking about some folks where it makes relationships not feel authentic and distant. And so supporting folks if folks are coming in and wanting to actually have more rich connections, community, it's also part of the work is understanding your own experience, as opposed to operating towards the standards and expectations that I keep talking about, that kind of lead you into this path where, oh, these folks aren't really, sometimes, not all the times, but like these folks aren't on the path towards me understanding myself more and finding folks who are curious about your needs, are curious and want to show up in understanding your specific way of looking at the world, navigating the world. I know that brings up many different examples of what those needs could look like.
And I think that when we're talking about even just the community who checks in with you about your needs, right? I'm thinking, in my own personal life, like sometimes I have to say, hey, I can't go to that thing that's got a bajillion people, flashing lights, loud noises, and too many smells.
Oh my gosh.
And so like, it's either how do I say no without feeling shame that my friends are going to be upset with that? Or, sometimes my friends will say, okay, so do you want to come to this portion of it before it gets to be super overstimulating? Do we need to figure out a ride home for you first? Right. And so, and I think there's kind of something really lovely, even about queer folks in general, and that because we're so used to being inquisitive and like wanting to get to know a person and like the way they experience queerness, that like the neurodiversity piece seems to come a little bit more naturally, right? Like, okay, so like that, I want to respect all of these things about your identity here. So like, how does this also meld into that? So I think that that's a really kind of a beautiful crossover, I guess.
Totally. Yeah. I think the focus in that to me is like, instead of like fitting into these boxes to fit into some kind of group, it's more exploration focused. And so focusing more on exploring yourself, your patterns, how you show up in certain environments, patterns in certain interpersonal dynamics or different roles that you put on too. And on my end, I think that leads to richer connections too, because you're able to speak from a place of exploration, and even sometimes lead, after doing all the work in kind of understanding your own patterns, lead to a space of more curiosity for other folks that like you know the questions to ask them in getting to know them, because you're coming from your own frame of reference around, for example, is this light too bright? Do you want, do you want me to turn, like stuff like that, right? Like sensory needs, like, and can tune into environments a lot differently than other folks who maybe are not even thinking about that.
Absolutely.
To me, that signals a lot more deeper curiosity, and the right people are going to clock that and be like, oh, yeah, no one really asks me that. And I don't know. I think that's like a nice little bridge that we can build with folks.
Yeah, definitely. Because again, the system says everything else is fine. You can have this overstimulating environment. And it's up to us to be like, we can take care of each other better. What else do we have in terms of working with folks?
Here at OSTC, we also center queer-informed care. And so I think that an approach that kind of intersects with that specific care, queer-informed care and neurodiverse-informed care, is this idea of in queer therapy and queer-informed therapy, we're also keeping in mind stuff like heteronormativity, gender norms. On my end, that mirrors a lot of what neurodiverse folks might also need to keep in mind too when they're navigating the world not designed for them. One thing or a parallel that I see is this like navigating worlds, spaces, environments not designed for you. Thinking of queer folks and neurodiverse folks, there's this requirement of repression that goes hand in hand with that, like repressing your own needs or repressing the way you want to express yourself or look or have some kind of alignment with the way that you feel on the inside to also be represented on the outside too. I think like the most basic example I think of is like boys don't play with dolls, which is I'm pulling from my own childhood experiences. But then like in an adult body, now I'm like, oh, being queer, neurodiverse, and being in this body can center something that's different from repression, something that focuses exploration, but also possibility, authenticity. And I think that's exciting.
Yeah, it does get to be exciting. I like the idea of even just approaching this as kind of like experimentation and play along with the exploration, right? Like it doesn't have to be a shameful thing to explore the things that work for you. Like it can be fun. Like we experimented with a bunch of fidgets and we decided that again, this Neato thing is like the thing, right? Like it just got to be like, but I touched the slime that we have in the office and it makes me want to throw up. Like, so like just noticing what those are. Like it gets to be funny and it gets to be playful and it doesn't have, people might roll their eyes at you and you're like, oh, that's weird. Like, okay, well, I thought it was fun.
Yeah.
So helping folks kind of get to that place of acceptance and play is kind of something that I like to focus on too. How can it just be like throwing spaghetti at a wall, see what sticks, and the rest of it is just not of consequence?
I really like that spaghetti image right now. I'm thinking spaghetti, but I'm also thinking of like in relationship to like shame and guilt too. Like it's okay to make mistakes. I think like it might come into line with like if you're in a queer body too, it can feel like maybe at times you're not enough of this, which can also very easily mirror neurodiverse experiences. I'm not enough of this. And part of figuring out what does make you feel more authentic or enough in your own views, in your own eyes, is sometimes you're going to make mistakes too. And see, maybe that spaghetti didn't stick on the wall, but maybe that one did.
We can still have compassion for the spaghetti that didn't stick on the wall.
That felt like such a like right turn right now, like a sharp right turn, but it made sense in my brain.
Our brains are great and they're different. It's fine.
Yeah.
Some of the things that I think have been really salient points is that there's a lot of different ways to experience neurodiversity and to experience your own neurodivergence, right? Like, regardless of your quote unquote official diagnosis or being self-identified, like all of this is a spectrum. There's a lot of crossover between a lot of things. And just because you are not like fully on one side of the spectrum or the other, like it's still a valid experience. Just knowing that those things are all fluid and things can change too. You get older, you get different support.
Yeah. I think maybe another point is because we're talking about neurodiversity, right? So the societal part, the community part, maybe this goes for folks who are looking for support through a therapy lens, like keeping in mind what kind of therapist you want. What kind of, do you want a therapist that, might be a little bit more in the know of neurodiversity lingo, language, kind of plugged into what goes on the cultural level of neurodiversity world? And at the same time, are they comfortable with meeting you in your explorations of maybe systems and structures that you've had to navigate, which might be contributing to why you want to go to therapy this time around, right? And so not just talking about ableism, but thinking through the queer lens too, heteronormativity, all these other systemic structures that really sometimes contribute to our mental well-being, the way we see ourselves. Thinking about how does the therapist that you're looking at or potentially going to start with think about those structures? How do they speak about them?
So my spicy recap of that is, if your therapist can't name the systems that are working against you, find a new therapist.
Yes.
Yeah, because they shouldn't be contributing to your shame about the way that you experience this. I think these brains are great. I love the way that they are fluid. I love the way that neurodiverse folks can see the world, experience the world, come up with beautiful ideas and patterns, and that just all the things are just so cool. Brains are so cool.
Yeah. Immediately I was like, yay, brains. That was my first thought.
Well, I think I like to call it, in my own colloquial language, very like the neurospicy is kicking in. So, so I think maybe we start to wrap it up here. We're talking about, in our next little mini series, Ernesto's gonna do our intro for that, I believe. And they're gonna be talking about Beyond the Wounds, identity-based harm and community care.
Right. And then the next series will include, I think, the guest, Jose Rosairo, founder of Phoenix Empowered, TEDx storyteller, and trauma specialist, talking about his PhD trauma research and own lived experience of being a queer disabled Latino man and his quest to make systemic change through storytelling. Yeah, and as the rest of that mini series, we'll have Jenny and Allison talking about generational strength and community healing, and myself and Tara will be back talking about exploring the relationship between embodiment and community care. And so, love to know your thoughts on this episode, on this series that we've had. So if this was useful, we'd love to hear about it or have you share us with your friends. Ernesto, thanks so much for participating in this conversation with me. Yeah, thanks for letting me yap.
Anytime. And here is your queer moment of joy.
Bye.
I'm Manny Munoz. I am from Project Q. I'm the associate director there. Pronouns are they, them. Big moment of queer joy has been being able to be in community with folks, being able to create community. It's where spaces that there were before where they weren't really allowed. a lot of the work that we do at Project Q is a little bit of punk rockness, where it's kind of like, resistance through existence, and kind of like taking up space and then, giving it back to the younger generation. So being able to create that space, whether it's at our block parties or whether it's at events like this, where we have that intergenerational connection, really does kind of create that joy for me, right? Being able to tell young folks that there is a way for us to be able to, age and grow into rates of success, into avenues of success and excellence. That matters. That's a huge, huge moment of queer joy, and even being here is another one, like I said. So I'm all for it.
Hi, my name is Sage, the motherfucking sagacity. Pronouns she, they, and a moment of queer joy that I recently just experienced was me and my gay ass friends literally just had like a jam sesh yesterday. We was drinking Taylor Port wine, and we were just singing some gay ass songs around the fire pit, and it was just so beautiful. Yeah, just being in community with other queer folks.
Thanks for joining us. If you're in California and looking for a therapist, visit our website at openspacetherapycollective.com and book a free intro call with one of our therapists. If you're enjoying My Therapist Is Out, please rate, review, and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Do you know somebody who could use a little extra dose of queer community? Send them one of your favorite episodes of My Therapist Is Out and help our collective grow one listen at a time. My Therapist Is Out is an open space therapy collective podcast, and our podcast editing is done by Rachel Peltzer and Smash and Grab Studio. We'd love to hear from you about today's topic, so email us at info@openspacetherapycollective.com. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Open Space Therapy Collective. Thanks for listening.